Welcome to the Knowledge Gumbo podcast, where we mix together timeless wisdom and thought-provoking stories using quotes, sayings, proverbs, and book passages primarily by Black women. I'm your curious-minded host, Alicia Thomas, who loves gathering wisdom to use at the right time. Let's get cooking with this week's quote. When I liberate myself, I liberate others. If you don't speak out, ain't nobody going to speak out for you. Fannie Lou Hamer. The former sharecropper, Fannie Lou Hamer, was such a powerful speaker that she struck fear in the White House. President Johnson calls an impromptu press conference to prevent Hamer's testimony at Democratic National Convention from going live on air. Despite this attempt to block, her complete testimony was broadcast on the national evening news. She is a powerful, powerful figure in the civil rights movement, and I believe her story should be more widely spread. But when you look at this quote of having liberated herself, it's the quintessential testimony of don't do for others what you won't do for yourself. Or if you flip that again, you can't do for others what you won't do for yourself. Hamer was well known from liberating herself from sharecropping, even though giving her stance on wanting to just have the right to vote, her job was taken away and she was attacked and threatened in her community for just wanting to have the right to vote. And when you hear stories like that, on a side note, it really makes me angry that people do not want to use their right to vote or only use their right to vote for national elections and don't participate in local city and state elections, because that has a more powerful impact on your everyday life than the national elections. But let's get back to the quote. The thing about liberating yourself is you become an example that others can follow. You start creating a path that others can use your bravery, your boldness to step out of the shadows and into the light, especially when you think about it in the standpoint of children, because for children, more is caught than taught. Children learn more by what you do and how they see you live than by what you tell them to do, because you can no longer live in the era of just because I told you so. And that's not only just for children, that's for adults too, because many adults look at it, different situations, as this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to do it my way. But for you, you have to take all the steps. I can skip a step here or there. I can either cheat my way through, lie my way through. But no, in order for you to get to where that I've gotten to, you have to take all the steps. Because if you look at it from a historical standpoint, that is the difference between white and Black. A lot of the histories of these big industrial families, people who gained their wealth during the Industrial Revolution, a lot of them didn't systematically go through the process to gaining their wealth. They cut corners. They cheated people. But then when you have someone of a different race trying to better their family and reach a level of wealth, they want them to take all the necessary steps that unfortunately they've created or discarded on their way to the top. So there's a Jewish principle that children learn primarily through observation and modeling rather than direct instruction. And I think we need to hold dear to that thought process as we go forward, that you are the example that is closest to home for those children. And even if you're not the parental, you're not their parents, if you're influential in their lives, how you live your life also gives them another avenue from which to speak and free themselves from any preconceived notions that are out there. One of the biggest gifts of Fannie Lou Hamer was her ability to speak to reach people. And her philosophy, at least from what I've read and from what I've seen, is she spoke to inspire more than to motivate. Because to me, motivation is kind of a pushing motion, where inspiration is more that you've given them fuel and they've taken the fuel and run with it. Because when you look at the word inspire, it comes from the Latin inspire, which means to breathe or blow into. From a biblical standpoint, when we say God breathed, God inspired, God breathed life into scripture. He breathed life into man. So it's something that's internal that comes out. When we look at motivate, it's more like a pushing motion. Let's use the example of, or analogy of, inspire is like adding gasoline to a car to fuel it, whereas motivation is like placing the car in neutral but having to get out and push it. One is definitely more powerful and more lasting than the other. And as we look at Fannie Lou Hamer, one of her most famous quotes is, "I am sick and tired of being sick and tired." That whole statement encapsulated her frustration with the system of racism and inequality, and it really brought out all the pain that people felt and were going through just because they wanted the right to vote, just because they wanted the right to be able to go where they wanted to go without being harassed. Even when Blacks stayed on, quote unquote, their side of town and worried about improving their area eventually, as we look throughout history with multiple stories, whites came in and destroyed everything that was separate because their version of equal meant Blacks being below them. Blacks being more successful, that's not equal either. But instead of using it as an inspiration to them to do better, it was better to keep Blacks down than to raise themselves up. And I think that is a lesson that their children and grandchildren learned, and they were never set free from hatred. They did not liberate their children from the weight of hatred, of racism, of inequality. They gave them the same burden that they grew up with. But we, as Black people, need to liberate our children by the way we live our lives, by how we treat people, by how we treat family. And we must remember where we came from. Because if we remember where we came from, if we stay humble, we will remain and keep our work ethic. We will keep focused on the things and the people that matter. We will not look down on people who had to start lower than we did. We won't look down on people who started where we started, forgetting those things that were before. Because just because you become successful doesn't mean now that you're on a level that you need to whitewash your background, because everything in your background made you what you are today. It is your foundation. And in studying history, no matter the culture, no matter the ethnicity, if you forget where you came from and you don't pass those lessons on to your children, it's fine to want them to not have to struggle. There was a work ethic that we need to maintain, that we need to teach to liberate each generation, because liberation is a continuing process. It is not a destination. It is a journey, as is most of life. We have different stops along the way, but there's still more to be gained, still more to see, to grow, to do. And that is the same thing with liberation. You liberate yourself every day based on the choices you make, on the people you choose to have in your life, the people you choose to impact. It is an ongoing process, because at any time when you think you've arrived, when you stop growing, when you stop sharing, you bind yourself into a box. You take away your freedom. You are no longer free. And it amazes me that people don't realize it. They try to hold themselves at a certain level, at a certain standard that serves nobody. Doesn't serve them, and it doesn't serve the people in their lives. The one thing we need to understand that when we liberate ourselves, that gives other people permission to do the same. We have to understand that that permission is transferable. And it doesn't necessarily mean if I'm a lawyer and I let the kids in my neighborhood see that I'm a lawyer, that they can become a lawyer too. It's permissible and transferable in the sense that I had a dream. I put in the work produced results. That liberation is transferable. And that's why it's so important, whether you be child or adult, to know your history, because it expands your idea of family and of culture. A lot of people get caught up in the saying that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, so that if Papa was a Rolling Stone, then the son is going to be a Rolling Stone. That is not true, because your family is more expansive than just the people immediately around you. It's a blessing if the people that are in your immediate family are successful, are hardworking, God-fearing people, but that's not always the case. So we have to expand our view of family. And even when some of those are great people, they've narrow-minded themselves that says success looks like a certain thing, or you can't be a successful, let's say, artist. Artists don't make money. So you force your child into accounting or engineering or medicine. If we know our history, we can see other artists, other people who were successful, because success definitely does leave clues. And we need to share that not only in our culture, but I think with everything, you should always start within your culture first, because as your culture is stronger, it's able to fight back and resist lies, resist people not telling the truth in situations, rewriting history to fit their narrative. But I just truly believe that if we could share what we know, it would set so many people free. Even some of the people that hate us, when they realize our contributions and what they are able to do because we existed as a people, to help us know that we're all human beings together going through this experience. And as we go back to the author of our quote, Fannie Lou Hamer, she was known for her ability to speak to people on their level. And she shared her personal experiences of discrimination and injustice to inspire people and to mobilize them to take action, to make change, to not just, my mama was a sharecropper, my grandma was a sharecropper, my great grandma was a sharecropper, and that is where we're going to stay. I think she had a valuable lesson to teach us, because as she learned more, she grew. She didn't let her lack of formal education deter her. She went to where she needed to go to learn and became better, but she wanted to make sure that she wasn't better alone, that everything she learned, she was taking back to the people in her community and working hard to uplift the people in her community. And that is a powerful, powerful gift. That is a giving heart, and something that we should all work towards, to leaving our community, our families in a better place than before we arrived. So let's look at this quote one more time. When I liberate myself, I liberate others. If you don't speak out, ain't nobody going to speak out for you. And when we look at that last part about nobody's going to speak out for you, I believe she was referring to the fact that the people who, quote unquote, win the war tell the story. So you lose out on everything else. So we have to be able to speak out and tell our own truth, share our own stories, so that the full picture is shared. And I think that is even true from the standpoint of with her fight with the Mississippi delegation and trying to get them recognized at the Democratic National Convention. They had to speak out in order to get their voices heard. But at the same time, compromises were made on the back end, which let them down. They were able to get 2 free at-large votes, but it's not what they came there for. But other leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. made compromises on behalf of people that he wasn't fighting for. I have a kind of love-hate ideal when it comes to Martin Luther King of all the great things he did, but there were sides of him where he made too many compromises. And usually, unfortunately, it was at the expense of women. So I'm working my way through that because everybody has a good and a bad side, and we've got to balance those ideals out. I think that Fannie Lou Hamer was one of the most powerful speakers in that you felt the pain, you felt the love, you felt the joy, you felt all her emotions when she spoke. And there was an honesty in everything she said. And that's what touched people. That's what scared President Johnson and the rest of the Democratic Party, that they didn't want her message out there because you were looking at someone who was self-taught, who was beaten and abused for wanting her rights that were guaranteed her in the Constitution. And that even though she was beaten and abused and misused, she still stood strong and was still telling the truth. Her story was consistent. It never wavered. And that scared plenty of people, both white and Black. Let's look at our challenge for this week, because I think it would be, very, very, very powerful. If you could amplify one cause or issue with your voice, what would it be? Leave a comment below and let me know, because there are so many different things out there that need to be amplified, that need to be told, that need to be shared. I want to give you this opportunity to do that below. So thank you again for listening and or watching. Hopefully you received value from this episode, and I ask that you would share it with a few of your friends and leave, like I said, like this, leave a comment below, because knowing that you are always welcome to pull up a chair. There's room at the table, the gumbo is hot, and it's made with love. See you next week.